from the start, I had this idea on how I would paint these shoes and the feet. Basically, I knew that I wanted to preserve a lot of light, and I also wanted to do not in a looser way, but more like you leave spots of paint and the paint is like not finished in some areas. So I wanted to give it like a specific look, a little bit different comparing to what I normally paint or how I normally paint, because some of my animals, and whenever I paint a person, I do focus more on detail and it's more like a realistic. The skin looks very smooth normally when I do that and so on. In this case, there's a lot of spots, like you will see like the separation of paint and you will see that layer on top of layer. You will definitely see that separation, and especially on the bows and the shoes, and the skin is actually easier than you might think. You don't have to go with these colors. These are just my colors that I like to use for the skin tones. And whenever you start with that blue and then you cover that, add the colors of quin red, yellow ochre, and so on, and then neutral tint, then it just kind of gives you that natural look of the skin. This is actually a perfect example of why I like paper with texture, because whenever I was painting like that skin tone, the texture automatically created that texture actually that you would have on the skin. Focus on was where do I see the light? So that was one thing, to make sure I captured that in my painting. And the second thing is I knew that shoe behind is going to be blurry, out of focus. And here are all the colors. There's really nothing unusual with these colors here, so please don't worry if you don't paint with whole by watercolors. I always say that because it is important. Watercolors, after all, are a personal choice. I just highly encourage you to paint with only professional grade watercolors. And then there's the rough watercolor paper. It's Arches, it's by Arches, and it's 140 pounds. And for the brushes, for wedding, I used Black Velvet series by Silver Brush, and it's 3/4. It's okay if you use different brand brush. You can use another flat brush or even. And this is the screenshot of my palette. This is a Richardson's plastic palette that I buy from Blix. This palette is usually about $3 or something like that. So the first step is to wet the background. And when I am wetting this background, I am actually wetting also the shoe in the back. So that's because I want that shoe to be painted wet on wet, and I want that shoe to stay out of focus. Now here's the tricky part, and the consistency of your paint whenever you add that paint on the shoe, exactly on that shoe, not the background. You want it to be more like a heavy cream in a way, maybe between half and half, the creamer and the heavy cream. So right now I am creating that color of the background and the shoe, and this is actually going to be the same color that I'm going to use in the background. So it's one basically tone of the color that goes everywhere. That color, which is mostly quin red with the yellow ochre, to that shoe, and the paint is not spreading as much as fast because I didn't have that much water in there, and I also didn't go like all the way to the bottom of that shoe. I only kind of left that paint closer to the other shoe. This part is dry, so the background here is painted more like wet on dry, but it's okay too. And keep in mind that actually when you do paint wet on dry, you do have automatically more control over what you're doing versus painting wet on wet. So there's some more of the quin red and yellow ochre, and I'm going back to paint the shoe. Again, there is really not that much water mixed in with my paint. It does look like there is a lot, and by the way, I'm adding a little bit of ochre right now. The paint won't spread as much, so even if I touch like the bottom part of that left foot, when I touch that line between the background and wherever the shoe starts, it still won't bleed as crazy fast because the paper is dry on the left side. And you do have to be careful here because it's very easy to create the blooms. So keep in mind burnt sienna, a little bit of burnt sienna and that purple color at the same time. And I'm just adding those colors, and this is wet, so the paint is spreading. So I continue adding colors and just building up that shoe. And I am referring to my reference photo the entire time because I do need to see where the light is and stuff like that. So that's why I'm lifting up, because I'm looking at the reference photo and it's like, okay, I need to have more light in there. Plus, if in case the paint spreads too fast, this is when I'm lifting it up at the same time. So right now I am wetting that other shoe to our right side. I am grabbing the paint and then trying to mostly work with the tip of the brush. So basically what I normally do, I use the tip of the brush for tight spots, and then whenever the area is a little larger, then I'll use more of that head of the brush. But generally I just like to work with the tip of it and have paint and more of the body of the brush so I can keep going and keep painting. But the tip of the brush really serves here as a smaller brush at the same time, because we always start with watercolors from light to dark. So here's neutral tint mixed with quinacridone red, and now I'm focusing on building the darker tones. So there's that line whenever you see the skin and then the shoe starts, so there's a shadow that comes right on the skin from that shoe, and this is the line I am working on right now. Way more color, and for now I'm still focusing on the shoe, but I needed to create more of that color so I can work faster. You can tell the way the paint spreads, it was still wet a little bit. So I'm taking advantage of the fact that that part is still wet, and I'm adding the darker color, the tone on the bottom of the shoe. The strokes, lines are separate, like you can see them, and underneath the layer you can definitely see another layer and stuff like that. So this is actually important part. I am painting the skin tone, and I started with cobalt blue, but this cobalt blue has a little bit of quin red already, and there's some of the indigo. I just added a little bit of indigo, so it's a little darker on the bottom part of that skin, the area that you see. So blue first, and then the real skin tones. I added some of the ochre as well to my quin red mixed with yellow ochre. This part of the painting, so the leg behind, the shoe behind, is painted mostly wet on wet, and I want it to be out of focus and be a little paler compared to the front shoe and the leg, the foot. So I need the front side, the front part of this painting to have more color, more vibrancy, and be more defined. And I'm painting now the lines next to the bows, the shoes. So again, whatever we see, the edge between the foot and where we see now the ribbon, and then there's a shoe, there would be some shadow, and we can see that shadow clearly on the photograph and on the reference photo. That's how I basically guide myself with what color do I need. Like if I see a little more yellow, then I'm gonna go more for like a yellow ochre, more yellow ochre than quin red, and then whenever I see more pink, then of course I'm gonna add more of that quin red, because the previous layer intention was to just bring water and to paint all this wet on wet, but the water is so dirty that it looks like almost coloring from the start, which would be automatically wet on dry. But the thing is that I kind of like that. Like I could easily just switch my waters and get a clean water, but I like that it has that tone already to it. It gives me like a jump start to what I want it to be, because I want the pale washes, especially around the ribbons. So do you see like how I am painting that part? So I'm pushing the paint a little bit here and just really playing with it, but I already have that area is wet. And I'm just adding more color. I have to be careful here. Don't want to overdo it. Don't want to add too much of it. And everything is just done really with not that much water in my paint. It looks like there could be a lot of water when you look at my wells, but it really isn't. And I'm mostly grabbing all that with the tip of my brush. This is important now. How I'm going to paint this piece of skin to make it look so natural, so real. For now, I wet it that leg, and I'm starting with that blue color, cobalt blue, the initial color of the skin. And to make it look natural, that's why I'm using the blue color. And now there is some of the purple, so I am mixing quin red with yellow ochre, and I do have some of the blue in there and also burnt sienna. So I am adding all this on top of my blue. I'm adding all of that on top of my blue color. I'm going gradually. I'm not just like grabbing a lot of paint and going over the entire area without even thinking where to preserve the light. I am thinking where the light is and where needs to be more paint. This is what I'm going over, those lighter parts, the areas that I preserve to stay white or light on the paper. This is my dry layer. Just like I said before, watercolors always dry more pale when we first see them on a watercolor paper, when they're wet. So this is the pale color. This is what just happened. So all my painting just dried into this pale wash. But right now I'm adding all these darker colors because I'm starting this second layer wet on dry. So right now I'm adding darker tones, wherever I see darker tones in the reference photo. And of course there's some shadows next to that ribbon. So this is quin red, some of the yellow ochre, there's already some of that oak. And it's important to not forget about these shadows because that also makes it look more natural, more realistic. So pretty much the rest of this video, all I'm doing is just adding additional layers. You want to use some of the colors from the object you're using and complementary colors of the color of the main object. So the secondary colors. So let's say, I always like to refer this to an apple because it's the easiest to explain this. So let's say you have a red apple. So you have a red color, that's a primary color. What is the secondary or complementary color to red? It's green. So when you paint that red apple and then you paint that shadow, you want to add some of that green to your red to create that shadow. So the same thing with these shoes, ballerina shoes. So thank you so much guys for watching this and listening, and I hope you enjoyed this class and we'll have many more.